Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the wild world of Prohibition, a time when desperate Americans turned their backyards into chemistry labs, and mixing drinks meant dodging the law more than worrying about whether the martini is shaken or stirred. We're not just talking about moonshine, this is the era of bathtub gin, where your local speakeasy could double as the local pharmacy or your great-aunt's knitting circle. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below about your favourite cocktail or your drunk uncle's top secret brewing methods. Now, dim those lights, turn on a fan for that cosy white noise, and let's create a safe space where the law can't find you, assuming you're hiding a rogue bottle or two. Let's take a moment. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to sip refreshments out of a dirty jar in a dimly lit basement, while listening to the jazz band that isn't really a jazz band but a bunch of very nervous guys, hoping an officer doesn't come sniffing? What ingredients are in the worst homemade liquor you could ever imagine? How did folks negotiate bootlegger deals without falling victim to an actual mob? If you found yourself in 1920s Chicago, would you be the one shaking cocktails or the one shaking in fear because your best friend just became a snitch? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in a Prohibition-era speakeasy. The year is 1921. You're surrounded by shady deals, questionable drink recipes, and the smell of mystery. Good luck. In 1920, the 18th Amendment kicked in, igniting a nationwide ban on alcoholic beverages. Ah yes, a brilliant idea, right? Because when you tell a nation of partygoers they can't have alcohol, they clearly won't find a way around the rules. It's like telling a cat not to knock over your glass of water, just not going to happen. This set the stage for everything from speakeasies to organised crime, ensuring that people would get their booze one way or another, even if it meant using the family bathtub as a distillery. Picture this. You're an average Joe or Jane craving a cocktail after a long day's work. Suddenly the government flips a switch and bans your beloved drink, effectively turning your evening routine into a puzzle that requires creativity and a bit of bravado. So what do? You drown your sorrows in absolutely nothing, or do you? Instead, you quickly gather a group of like-minded friends and start plotting how to get your hands on the good stuff again. Maybe a little backyard brewing inspired by that dubious recipe you found on the internet, or an overheard bar conversation from a friend of a friend. The fallout was hilariously predictable. Neighbourhoods morphed into impromptu science labs where excess alcohol sunk away in the homes of budding chemists. Here's a thought. If you were really desperate, could you ferment anything? I mean, have you ever tasted grape juice that was actually hand-pressed from rotten fruits? Urban legends loomed larger than life as recipes suggested anything from apples to even, and I kid you not, fermented hay as potential gin replacements. Trust me, mixing these brews was an unholy fortune-seeking adventure, but not exactly a trip to a five-star restaurant. And while most social drinkers attempted to keep their heads low, organised crime surged spectacularly. With the police busy chasing ghosts, mobsters dotted the United States like roaches in a cupboard. These enterprising criminals took the law of the land and twisted it into the wildest game of cat and mouse. Are you rolling your eyes? Because you might laugh at the irony. The 18th Amendment had undoubtedly set the stage for a lucrative underground business. And forget pet grooming. Suddenly the real side hustle was the 6-gallon jug of homemade moonshine a fella in the neighbourhood was selling. But it wasn't all warehouse parties and secret knock codes. The social landscape was shifting, and with it came tremendous challenges from the government. Law enforcement found themselves in a peculiar situation, tasked with upholding ridiculous laws while also contending with mobs of spirited citizens who just wanted their evening libations. Archer-driven police raids rapidly turned into slapstick comedy routines. Picture a poor officer fist raised to throw down just as a hail of whiskey jugs fills the air, and suddenly they're more likely to join the dance than enforce any laws. To downplay the sheer chaos would be like putting a paper umbrella in actual hurricane category 5. Most people still went about their lives, albeit a little more energetically and creatively craving the taste of forbidden fruit. Speakeasies sprang up like weeds, the secretive spots where the dapper and daring could get their drinks without too much fuss. As people flocked to these hidden drinking holes, bartenders had to master the fine art of smuggling not only drinks, but also ingredients that the average person had no idea existed. It came to the point where ordering a cocktail required more coded language than a Morse codebook at sea. "I'll have the usual" became the mental code for "please do not mention anything alcoholic while the officer is watching." And let's not forget the audacity of those adventurous enough to challenge the laws openly. They wore flapper dresses that barely skimmed their knees, and swell of raucous laughter filled the hidden spaces as jazz music blended with the taste of rebellion. Was it foolish? Perhaps. Was it fun? Absolutely. Ultimately, the waves of chaos ensued thanks to the magnificent and ridiculous nature of the Prohibition laws. As society collided enthusiastically with a baffling ban on alcohol, Americans learned something crucial. Not only do they possess a hearty appetite for partying, but the relentless human spirit will stop at nothing, even a nationwide ban, to find reasons to celebrate, even if that meant turning their homes into high-stakes distilleries. So as you raise your glass tonight, keep it classy, and remember the daring individuals who made it all possible, ready to splash their spirits upon the globe again as the laws began to crumble. Cheers to chaos. Meet the bootleggers, the underground warriors of the Prohibition era, moving faster than a speeding train and all with a knowing glint in their eyes. These folks were like the modern-day Uber drivers, only instead of hailing them for a ride, you'd call them for a shipment, and heaven forbid you forgot the secret handshake. Picture the hustle. They were zipping in and out of back alleys, dodging not just cops but possibly also rival gangsters, all while carrying crates of homemade liquor that would put any college dorm's concoction to shame. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what being a bootlegger really meant. These weren't just your average neighbourhood folks trying to pay their bills. No, they were the ultimate thrill-seekers, armed with hidden compartments in their vehicles, swerving around law enforcement like professional race car drivers. They took the term "run for your life" to a whole new level. Ever seen someone upgrade their station wagon into a high-speed getaway vehicle? Probably not, but it happened. They'd take an old family car and transform it into a mobile vineyard, complete with a secret stash of whiskey in the trunk that would turn even the most demure tea party into a scandalous soiree. But where did these intrepid souls get their liquid courage? Ah, my friends, they had an arsenal of techniques that would make any modern bartender nod in approval or panic in horror. Picture landscapes of secret distilleries tucked away in the woods, where moonshiners turn the art of fermentation into a high-stakes competition against time and the law. These underground operations were often packed to the brim with locals who had decided that the risk of creating a concoction called rot gut was less terrifying than enduring a dry night at home. The end product? A spirit so intense that one sip could make your toes curl and your grandmother weep with pride and possibly terror. And then we have the bootlegging methods. It wasn't just about flasks and barrels. These innovators would strap bottles to their boots, use cereal boxes as disguises, and even hide their goods in the guts of a pig as a last-ditch effort to stay ahead of the increasingly frustrated law enforcement. Imagine a cop shining his flashlight on an innocent-looking pig trotting down the street, blissfully unaware of its role in the underground liquor trade. The ingenuity of it all would make even the wisest of historians shake their heads in disbelief. But being a bootlegger was not for the faint-hearted. For every covert operation or successful shipment, there were countless dangers lurking at every corner. Rival gangs were on the prowl, ready to nab the competition's stash, or simply send a message often delivered in the form of a baseball bat. Suddenly a simple drop-off in a deserted alley could turn into a scene straight out of an action movie. Minus the slow-motion run, of course. Picture two gangsters, the tents, standoff, and a rain-soaked street as the perfect background. The stakes were high, and mistakes could become permanent reminders of that bad batch you'd probably regret, along with your poor life choices. And let's not forget the sheer number of people willing to write the moral code off as they discreetly passed over a few bucks for a gallon of questionable gin. From a well-dressed gentleman wanting to impress his date to a mum sneaking a bit to calm her nerves at home, the clientele was diverse and captivated. Orders were placed through whispers, and a transaction in a speakeasy was akin to an elite handshake among friends. So, while the government may have been hard at work trying to deter alcohol consumption, the bootleggers were busy creating a society, even if it was built on shaky ground. They were misunderstood rebels, outlaws who moonlit as chemists and politicians, skirting the boundaries imposed by draconian laws while shaping a cultural phenomenon that would ripple through generations. In essence, these clandestine figures became the unsung heroes of the Prohibition saga. They embody the relentless spirit of the American people, disruptive, creative, and full of aspirational hustle. While politicians clamoured to uphold the law, the bootleggers laughed in the face of prohibition. They transformed adversity into ambition, and in doing so, forever enriched the fabric of American nightlife. So here's to the bootleggers, the patrons of freedom, the champions of chaos, and the true comedic relief in a time when the nation needed it most. Imagine a world where the hottest parties are held behind secret doors, with the cover charge being your ability to keep your mouth shut. In a speakeasy, you'd find everything from jazz music echoing through smoky rooms to women wearing pearls and laughing just a little too loud for the amount of gin they managed to sneak in. These underground bars felt like exclusive clubs for the smart and the desperate, where everyone needed a pseudo-name, and the only rule was to keep the volume up and the police out. As you step through the hidden entrance, usually concealed behind a full storefront or an unmarked door, you're hit with a wave of sound, trumpets blaring, pianos tinkling, and above it all, the unmistakable laughter of patrons trying to sample the illicit joys of forbidden booze. You see, in the Prohibition era, enjoying a night out required a level of stealth previously reserved for spies in wartime. This was no ordinary outing. It was an exercise in bravery and perhaps a sprinkle of foolishness. The walls were lined with makeshift Barcelona chairs, and the bar itself was often decorated with mismatched odds and ends you could only find in someone's basement. Each element contributed to the ambience, a little charm, a lot of danger, and a mild sense of foreboding that didn't quite mix well with gin. How did you know if you were in the right place? You'd usually have to say a special password, a bit like a club for introverts where the price for entry was dressed in vocabulary. "I'm feeling green tonight," might get you in if the bouncer was in a good mood. Or perhaps, "Is the owl awake?" See, the trick was memorising these phrases and hoping you didn't flub it in front of an overly proud officer of the law, waiting to ruin everyone's fun. What was worse? The fear of being busted or the dread of injuring your reputation because you forgot the right code? Tough call. Once inside, you'd be greeted with an atmosphere that was intoxicating in more ways than one. Jazz was the heartbeat of these speakeasies, and the musicians were the unsung heroes of the night, performing for tips beneath dim lighting and a haze of smoke. You might even find a trumpeter named Louis, or a piano player named Duke, each bringing an electric buzz to the damp, secretive corners of these establishments. The bands wouldn't just play for applause, they played for survival. If the cops sniffed around, those skilled players worked like Olympians to distract. while patrons guzzled their drinks and pretended to engage in a scholarly debate over the merits of modernist literature. Of course, it wasn't all laughter and tap dancing. Enter the mafia, the true power players of the speakeasy scene. These shadowy figures ran things with an iron fist, ensuring that supplies of gin trickled down from the underground distilleries and made their way to the patrons who craved them. Talk about middlemen! The mobsters made sure the brew was as strong as the stories behind it. Each drink served was a gamble. Sometimes you got a smooth concoction that could make you sing a lullaby, and other times it felt like you were swallowing pure fire. Let's not forget about the women who frequented these spots, a different breed entirely. They shook off traditional roles like a dirty old coat, donning flamboyant dresses, bobbing their hair, and lighting their cigarettes with a flair that would make any socialite blush. These women, often called flappers, were sloshing adventure and defiance around in their cocktails, forcing society to look at them with a mix of admiration and horror. Yet, with each sip of liquor, they didn't care how the world viewed them. They were living fiercely, free from the constraints of picking out carpet patterns or tending to household chores. Instead, they were waltzing through Tuesday nights under enchanting chandeliers, sipping gin and dancing with none other than the debonair men who weren't afraid to let their colourful personalities shine. But with thrill comes inevitable consequences, and no speakeasy was immune to the law's heavy hand. The night would inevitably end in a flurry of chaos when law enforcement struck, casting a shadow over the revellers. One moment you'd be waltzing, the next you'd find yourself scrambling for the nearest exit, praying your ill-fitting shoes wouldn't trip you up. Imagine the sight. People scattering like pigeons, slamming through hidden doors and ducking beneath tables as if it were all part of the act. Ironically, nothing heightened the appeal of speakeasies like the looming threat of getting caught. In the end, speakeasies became more than mere drinking establishments. They represented the very spirit of rebellion against a world that sought to snuff out joy and camaraderie. Each hidden bar echoed with laughter and camaraderie that refused to go quietly into the night, showing that the human spirit has a remarkable way of sneaking through the cracks, much like that recipe for bathtub gin. Speakeasies captured the essence of a generation yearning to live freely if only for a night, reminding us all that sometimes, amidst the chaos, a little mischief is exactly what we need. So, raise your glass and toast to those who dared to live boldly, finding their way, one secret password at a time. Let's talk about bathtub gin. You know, that lovely concoction which, if you squinted just right, might resemble actual gin. When you have desperate people looking to quench their thirst for alcohol, it's either bathtub gin or nothing. The distilling process? Let's just say it involves some very questionable ingredients, creativity, and a healthy dose of bravery, or insanity. Forget about the regular drinking experience. This was a gamble of taste buds and health, with a side of regret. So how did this notorious drink come to be? In the age of Prohibition, when alcohol was banned but the thirst for it surged like a rebel yell, everyday folks turned their homes into makeshift distilleries. Bathtubs, once merely a sanctuary for personal hygiene, now served as both container and distillery. The picture is clear. You, a courageous spirit, slip into your bathroom, roll up your sleeves, and prepare for what could only be described as a chemistry experiment gone wildly off script. Picture a room filled with assorted ingredients you swiped from your kitchen. Cornmeal, sugar, and any grains that might not have been used since the summer of 16. Add some yeast, a sprinkle of whatever spice was left in the jar, and for good measure toss in a few random herbs. Now comes the fun part. You mix everything with water, expecting a miracle to happen. After all, it's either that or a sober night on your couch with a very unsatisfying soda. As you close the drain and begin your brewing, your hopefully clean bathtub becomes a cauldron of questionable choices. You can almost hear a disembodied voice calling out, "How's that gin coming along?" To be fair, distilling works best without an audience, and definitely without a curious neighbour peeking through your window. Some home brewers opted for a more discreet method of producing gin, characteristically referred to as sipping it and praying it doesn't kill you, while others would just straight up blindfold themselves, thinking the taste wouldn't be so bad if they couldn't see it. Which, spoiler alert, it still was. The truth is, bathtub gin wasn't known for its quality. More often than not, it tasted less like artisanal gin and more like the bottom of a shoe, complete with an earthy finish. The alcohol content went through the roof, leading to some seriously wild nights that would have made the average hangover seem like a picnic in the park. Forget your typical Sunday morning headache. This was more like a 3-day-long regret session, where even the smallest sounds felt like a marching band playing at full volume. While the enjoyment level was questionable, the side effects of drinking bathtub gin could vary. Some lucky sippers ended up with a lovely buzz, euphoric giggles, and declarations of eternal love for their neighbours. Others, not so much. Health risks included ruining your digestive system. Hello, bathroom breaks. Waking up with a hangover that made you feel like you wrestled a bear, or experiencing the delightful surprise of temporary blindness, courtesy of as yet unknown chemical reactions. Ever heard the phrase, liquor before beer, you're in the clear? Forget that. Now it was more like bathtub gin before coffee or any kind of liquid, and you may enter a world of regret. However, thanks to the rise of this delightful concoction, a new cocktail culture emerged. True mixology coupled with ingenuity resulted in a variety of creative cocktails featuring bathtub gin. Because let's face it, you've got to try to make something out of the liquid disappointment you've created. Instead of tossing in a lime or two, you can suddenly find yourself throwing anything with sugar into the mix. Perhaps just some leftover raspberry preserves or that sad bottle of tonic collecting dust in the back of your cabinet. Voila! Instant mocktail magic that might just lead you to have a night full of wild stories, or zero memories. Near the end of Prohibition, bathtub gin became a symbol of rebellion, just as much a part of American history as the people who dared to create it. So, as you enjoy your carefully crafted drink tonight, remember the spirited pioneers who braved their bathtubs for a simple drink of gin. But maybe stick with a pocket-sized flask of artisanal liquor instead of channeling your inner scientist. With every sip of safely distilled alcohol, take a moment to honour those chaotic days when bathtub gin meant living on the edge, one regretted concoction at a time. Here's where things get sinister. Organised crime. Picture a bunch of men in fedoras shuffling about like they own the place, because, well, they kind of do. They dominated the liquor trade, fought turf battles, and ran speakeasies with the precision of a symphony. In the Prohibition era, mobsters became the rock stars, not for their talent, but for their ability to smuggle thousands of gallons of booze while keeping a low profile. It's a hard job, but someone had to do it. These gangsters, often more colourful than the cocktails they peddled, strutted around like peacocks blinded by the allure of the underground world. Remember Al Capone? You know, the guy who turned Chicago into his personal playground of illegal whiskey and street-level chaos? With a criminal empire built on speakeasies, Capone seemed less like a simple mobster and more like the star of his own action movie. One where the stakes were high and bullets flew as freely as the hooch. He made gobs of money faster than you could say, not your average gin. While respectable citizens were sipping sparkling seltzer and lamenting the loss of their right to drink, the gangsters were toasting to new, albeit dangerous, opportunities. But let's not forget about the competition. In the turbulent world of Prohibition, Rival gangs were popping up faster than mushrooms after a rainstorm. The Italian mafia was locked in a perpetual turf war with the Irish gangs, leading to violent showdowns that made the Wild West look like a picnic in the park. Just imagine poor delivery drivers nervously clutching a crate of gin while dodging bullets instead of potholes. The streets of Chicago transformed into battlefields where barrels full of booze could be just as valuable as barrels of gold. Each gang prickled with a fierce loyalty to its turf and a zero-tolerance policy for intrusions, especially if someone accidentally claimed the best hiding spots for their illegal goods. Now, you might be wondering about the methods, the what and how of their unbelievable liquor smuggling exploits. Picture this: secret distilleries tucked away in basements that were practically hiding in plain sight. While some speakeasies disguised themselves as legitimate establishments, others flaunted secrecy like a badge of honour. The clientele learned to master the art of the casual nod to gain entrance, and passwords were like gold dust. One wrong phrase, and you were as good as blacklisted. It's like having the most exclusive nightclub membership, but instead of a velvet rope, you have vigilant gang bouncers packing heat. And let's not overlook the dazzling and dangerous art of the rum runner. These clever souls often operated on the high seas, piloting shabby boats just out of sight of the Coast Guard while playing a game of cat and mouse with the law, all to deliver contraband to the thirsty masses. They were the seafaring heroines of their time, not the mermaids you hear about in fairy tales, but the gritty legends of the Prohibition era. Running moonshine was less about the romance of adventure and more about survival. Every successful run hung on a thread, testing skills, nerves and stomachs with each nautical mile. But what about the law? The authorities weren't entirely asleep at the wheel. There were valiant efforts on the police force's part to eliminate the criminal coffers of liquor. But just as they reached one gang, another would dart out from behind the shadows, like a game of whack-a-mole but with a lot more bullets involved. The cops, undeterred by the glamour of organised crime, attempted to establish their own networks within the criminal underworld. So, instead of sipping coffee peacefully at their desks, some were discovering the ever-harrowing capers of illicit bars. Ever thought you'd see a cop go undercover not to fight crime but to find the best whiskey? As the 1920s trudged on toward the close of Prohibition, mobsters enjoyed their glory days while keeping their heads on a swivel. They transformed entire cities into their personal playrooms, crafted connections that made Wall Street look like a kindergarten classroom, and, in the process, forever changed how Americans would think about alcohol. You see, though they thrived in secrecy, the legacies of these mobsters seeped into the broader culture, influencing everything from film noir to modern-day crime dramas. They were victims of their own reputation in the end, fused into the rich tapestry of American history, where they remained larger than life, pouring drinks and rising to new heights in a world that was simply too thirsty to quit. It's safe to say that the Prohibition gangsters didn't just pave the way for the modern cocktail culture. They created an entire ecosystem of bootlegging innovators, hard-boiled detectives, and enterprising drunks yearning to ring in a new era. Their legacy is a reminder of the tumultuous times from which we emerged, and possibly a cheeky tribute to how far we've come since the days when spreading the word was easier than spreading your arms wide for a missed cocktail hour. After all, they didn't just sell booze. They sold rebellion, adventure, and a taste of something sweetly intoxicating made even sweeter by the thrill of an ever-present danger. Goodbye, apron-wearing ladies of the 1920s. Hello to the flapper revolution. As women began to speak out more boldly, Prohibition offered a stage for them to step into the spotlight, quite literally. This was the era where sipping cocktails, bobbing haircuts, and dancing till sunrise were as normalised as talking back to your husband about the dishwasher. Women earned their freedom in the daring line of unknown liquor lines, as well as turning heads in the nightlife that would put modern parties to shame. This once unthinkable freedom was accompanied by a shimmering fringe dress and combat boots, making the age of Prohibition as much about liberation as it was about illicit alcohol. Women were no longer merely housewives decorating their homes with lace doilies and perfectly baked pies. They were revellers, reformers, and risk-takers. Imagine cozying up in a smoky speakeasy, where the air was thick with subversive laughter and jazz rhythms, liberated from the shadow of household chores. In fact, these ladies sometimes sported more charms around their necks than a Christmas tree, speaking out through their outfits, asserting themselves with every bold accessory. But what had changed their societal star so dramatically? The combination of suffrage and the accompanying fight for women's rights contributed to an environment ripe for reinvention. Women had gained the right to vote in 1920, and the lingering aftershocks of that monumental change were felt everywhere, from the ballot box to the bar room. Suddenly women realised they could have opinions, desires, and, dare we say, a whole lot of fun. All without the shackles of their domesticity. And those initial clinks of cocktail glasses were hailed as the soundtrack to a new era. Now, let's get real. The cocktail culture that was burgeoning during this time wasn't just about the drinks themselves. It was symbolic of a broader call for autonomy, where every sip tasted like triumph over a world that sought to keep women confined. That's right. Each gin fizz or whiskey sour was a declaration. When women stood in line for questionable moonshine, they were not only breaking the law, they were breaking stereotypes. Yes, Ruth, in that plaid skirt and bobbed hair, was on her way to becoming the most dangerous woman in town, clutching her mojito like the battle flag it represented. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with these newfound freedoms. The flapper lifestyle ruffled plenty of feathers, especially among the more conservative crowds who recalled a time when women's roles were not discussed at cocktail parties. With the emergence of flapper culture, the previous meekness that had defined women's social roles was tossed out like last week's stale bread. Get ready for the whispers. What will the neighbours think, they gasped while eyeing their daughters, longing for an adventure beyond the parlour. But did that stop the flappers? No. With every rebellious move trapped behind the veneer of decorum, they gained followers. Historians note that flappers weren't just about fashion, they were also about sisterhood. There was a collective strength that came from dancing together until dawn, sweating out the harsh realities of the outside world on parquet floors, transforming not just their lives but also society's perception of what women could achieve. The camaraderie born in those dimly lit speakeasies was electric, each woman part of a vastly uncharted culture that honoured female unity in pursuit of joy. But let's not kid ourselves. The glamorous flapper lifestyle was expensive and often riddled with danger. Women who stepped outside the accepted norms faced backlash that could range from just eyebrow-raising glares to dangerous confrontation. There was an edge to Prohibition, where some women found themselves entangled with not just the law, but also with unscrupulous characters who'd rather sell you whiskey than offer you a gentlemanly dance. The flapper lifestyle became a balancing act. Risk versus reward, allure versus consequence, all swirled together in a cocktail shaker of societal change. In retrospect, that decade was like a wild dance through history, a back and forth rhythm of progress, celebration, and the pursuit of independence. It paved the way for future generations of outspoken women, indelibly changing how roles were perceived not just in the US, but globally. As those brave flappers strolled past lamplit streets, their laughter echoed with the sentiment of a world awakening to the possibilities. And while they dived into the depths of the Prohibition lifestyle, they were doing so much more than just raising glasses. They were reshaping identities, one clink at a time. So the next time you dive into that cocktail or remember cocktail culture, tip your hat to the fearless flappers who danced on the precipice of change. They weren't just consuming cocktails, they were sipping on the essence of freedom and rewriting the script for women everywhere. The echo of their laughter and clatter of glasses still resonate today, reminding us that sometimes shaking things up is exactly what we need. Law enforcement during Prohibition was like playing whack-a-mole but with actual crime. Cops were overwhelmed, underfunded, and often given the choice between turning a blind eye and ending up with cement shoes. The chances of finding a speakeasy were about as high as finding a clean public restroom in medieval England. The more the government cracked down, the more ingenious the speakeasies became, making life for law enforcement a career challenge worthy of a never-ending sitcom. Let's set the scene. You wake up as a cop in 1920s America. Your morning coffee a steaming mess of high expectations and low budget. You've got officers roaming the streets with more ambition than ammunition, trying to spot the telltale signs of a speakeasy. Imagine trying to find a needle in a haystack, while the haystack is also whispering about gin cocktails in the basement. The truth? Most speakeasy owners were better at hiding than children playing hide and seek. They made clandestine entrances, secret passwords, and even trapdoors seem rudimentary. It's a wonder half the cops didn't hand in their badges and try their luck at the underground drinking scene themselves. When the law attempted to raid these secret bars, it often turned into a comical circus act of slapstick proportions. Picture a group of officers barging in all tough and imposing, only to find patrons sipping drinks and swapping jazz stories like they forgot they were supposed to be in imminent danger. Instead, laughter rang out, and the sound of flowing alcohol drowned out any thought of serious law enforcement. The first clue? The ominous sound of someone dropping a glass, an instant signal that Operation Bust That Bar had begun. But by the time they got their act together, the patrons had already slipped out back doors or through hidden exits, leaving the cops fumbling like hungry cats in a room full of rocking chairs. In the great American game of cat and mouse, it wasn't just the common folk bending the rules. Even the judges and politicians were in on the act. It's like every major city had its own rogue fraternity, where everyone was in the know, sharing tips like it was a local gossip column. The concept of a dry town took on a new meaning as citizens turned their homes into miniature distilleries, reminiscent of medieval alchemists hunting for gold. The flimsy laws had given birth to a competitive drinking culture, and every corner bar served as a tribute to the American spirit, or in this case the spirit in the bottle. The Prohibition era also invented a new strain of crime. Smuggling rang out louder than any jazz band while bootleggers and rum runners sailed through the moonlit waters as the underground movement flourished. These criminals had serious moxie. Think of them as the daring rock stars of their day. With speeds and tricks that sound like something out of a fast-paced action flick, they zipped across rivers and bays, delivering contraband faster than anyone could say bathtub gin. It's hard to imagine, but every bottle of liquor meant another creative escape for the law enforcement officers chasing them. A game of you can't catch me that saw more twists and turns than a circus performer on roller skates. There was also a rise in corruption within law enforcement and government. Who would have thought that being a cop could come with a side of moral ambiguity? Many found themselves paid off by bootleggers, resulting in some scenarios that felt more like plots from a convoluted crime novel than reality. Under the table, deals flowed as freely as the gin. Some officers even ran their own speakeasies, selling protection to keep the law on the lowdown while cashing in on the boozy profits. Furthermore, as the Prohibition era stretched on, law enforcement began to resemble a game of endurance. Officers had to manage not just speakeasies, but also the violence that arose from gang warfare among mobsters looking to take control of the liquor trade. Each gunfight drew crowds as if it were the latest boxing match, and the audience was downright entertained. Because what's more thrilling than watching a shootout unfold just one block over while your drink hangover kicks in after too many cocktails? Fate loves a sense of humour. Ending things on an ironic note, it's essential to remember that Prohibition came to an end in 1933. The law enforcement officers who had spent over a decade endlessly chasing shadows could finally put down their badges and swap beer for coffee once again. They must have thought they were stepping out of a relentless circus act and into a calm retirement home. After all the trouble, they discovered that they could trade in the pursuit of speakeasies for the innocent pleasure of a pint at a neighbourhood bar. Cheers to that. Enter the Anti-Saloon League, home to self-proclaimed temperance warriors. These folks took fighting alcohol prohibition to an organised level that would make any modern activist proud. With pamphlets and persuasive skills that could rival a used car salesman, they rallied the troops against the perceived evils of alcohol. Who knew destroying clubs could feel like a noble crusade? Their zeal was admirable, but did anyone mention the unforeseen consequences? Picture it. Meetings filled with impassioned speeches, a fervour that could ignite a wet napkin, and raucous applause echoing like a jazz band in full swing. They were armed not with picket signs, but with vocal cords strong enough to drown out any barroom brawl. The Anti-Saloon League, founded in 1893, effectively made the case that alcohol was the root of all societal ills. They portrayed drinkers as hapless victims led astray by the seductive grasp of liquor. This crusade leaned heavily into the idea that alcohol would transform a hard-working American man into a lazy lout, and that mothers would evolve from nurturing divine figures to sobbing shells of their former selves after just one too many at the local tavern. But let's break this down for a moment. Was it working? Well, kind of. The Anti-Saloon League managed to influence politics to the core, effectively turning the tables on alcohol. Some politicians, those vestiges of the old bootlegger industry who dared to shuffle closer to the drink, soon found themselves jobless as temperance ran rampant. The temperance warriors led campaigns that would make the best marketing firms weep with envy. Dramatic slogans and dramatic stories connected with the demographics in ways that made sermons and State of the Union addresses seem like a dull political seminar. It was the emotional pull of personal testimonies, combined with a dash of hyperbole, that made the case for sober living. After all, who wouldn't want to spare their family from the perceived horrors of drunkenness? However, the fervour didn't just lead to a clean, sober society rising from the ashes of tavern culture. It led to an increase in underground bars. Who could have predicted that telling people what they couldn't do would spur a rebellion against authority? The Anti-Saloon League became a virtual incubator for bootlegging operations as citizens looked to flip the bird at the very establishment tasked with telling them how to live. In a grand cosmic joke, temperance warriors might have inadvertently set up the perfect environment for the rise of illegal speakeasies, transforming social drinking from a casual pastime into a secretive pop culture phenomenon that your neighbour's great-uncle was likely dealing on the side. And oh boy, the irony. The very same people who attempted to eradicate alcohol often found themselves battling greater social insanity than drunken escapades could ever inspire. For instance, crime syndicates took centre stage in a desperate bid to quench society's thirst for spirits. So in reality, rather than eradicating alcohol, the Anti-Saloon League pushed it underground, resulting in the rise of mobsters, guns and violence. Talk about a noble pursuit gone wrong. Now let's mix in some humour through the lens of modern activism. Imagine if some overzealous group in our time decided to ban coffee, perhaps instigating a grand coffee-averse coalition fighting boldly for sleepy citizens to rise against Java's evils. It's like everyone's suddenly turning their houses into caffeine-free temples, picketing their local cafe, campaigning against the so-called demonic beans. Spoiler alert, people would riot. After all, do we really want to find out what happens when caffeine-deprived individuals gather in large groups? As Prohibition continued in a distant echo of the temperance movement, the message that alcohol was the epitome of evil gained momentum. But did it actually work? Spoiler, not quite. Most people simply found ways around the bans, gathering for clandestine cocktails while laughing at those who tried to police their drinking habits. The League forgot a common truth: tell people they can't do something, and they'll be sure to find a way to do it, often with extra flair and panache. By the time Prohibition simply unravelled amid the chaos of bootlegging, the Anti-Saloon League had paved the way for new traditions to emerge. What began as a noble aspiration transformed into a glorious tapestry of underground rebellion, illicit cocktails, and a lesson in the art of mischief. So, let's raise our imaginary glasses to the temperance warriors, who inadvertently fueled an era, turning dry and solemn into lively and illicit. Because if you can't beat 'em, throw a speakeasy party and keep the good times flowing. Cheers. Welcome to cocktail culture, where bartenders became mixology magicians overnight. The clandestine world of Prohibition led to the innovation of cocktails so intricate, you'd think they were concocted by wizardry rather than simple mortals along a dark bar. Suddenly, the gin fizz became a must-have, not just for taste but for the artistry of hiding the terrible tastes of poorly distilled gin. Why drink straight when you could mask it with something colourful and fruity? Imagine this: the local speakeasy, dimly lit and buzzing with hushed whispers, where patrons would sidle in like curious moths drawn to a flame. There, behind a bar that may or may not have been a stolen church altar, stood the cocktail magician, juggling bottles of questionable booze like an accomplished performer in a circus of deceit. These bartenders weren't just pouring drinks. They were the alchemists of the 1920s, turning rotgut into refreshment. The secret was simple yet profound. Cover up the horrendous taste with mixers utterly amazing. Tonic water topped with a squeeze of citrus? Brilliant. An aromatic bitter splash? Pure genius. A hint of grenadine? Well, now you're practically a world-class mixologist with roots in the ancient arts. Well, sorts. In this underground cocktail revolution, the choices were dizzying. You may not know if your drink contained fermented potato peel or illegal hooch, but by golly, it was served with a maraschino cherry, which must mean it's fancy, right? Bartenders took liberty to craft names as elaborate as the drinks themselves. Who could possibly resist a bee's knees or sidecars? The drinks could practically woo you into forgetting that every sip was like flirting with a hangover. Oh, you're looking for something refreshing. May I recommend a corpse reviver? Just a cheeky name. I assure you it's not a taste of last night's poorly aged absinthe. Of course, not all experimental cocktails turned out well. The legendary bathtub gin sour was less about taste and pure survival. A creative use of anything you could dig out from the back of your pantry might have led to a drink so potent it inspired hallucinations that made you think you were shaking hands with Harry Houdini. The storytelling ability was so significant that downing a shot was less about quenching thirst and more of a rite. Remember that night when you drank 3 bathtub gins and said you'd never speak of it? Trust me, you won't forget. As cocktails became a way to navigate through legal restrictions, ingenious bartenders came up with recipes that became popular for their complexity and their ability to distract from the solvent quality of the drinks themselves. Ingredients became coded messages. A drink called The Last Word could mean your last sober one if you hadn't packed your speakeasy shoes for the night. If you swirled anything sparkly topped with a twist of lemon, well, then you were living your best life. And let's not overlook the role of jazz, a soundtrack where each note flexed like a memory, bubbling through the glass like the drinks themselves. With jazz as the pulsating heart of the speakeasy, musicians mixed genres like bartenders blended flavours. Patrons swayed in and out of consciousness, not sure if they were enjoying each outsized note or each measure of moonshine mix floating inside them. The rhythm on the dance floor matched the vibrations of the cocktails being poured, creating a symphony of drunken joy and frantic foot-tapping. And just like that, the infamous cocktail became an art form. Enter enterprising women who jumped into the bartending scene, shaking up the game along with ice and spirits. Ladies learned to shake cocktails with a confidence that could match any gin-soaked mobster at the bar, swaying with elegance while navigating a sea of booze and bravado. As the 1920s rolled on, expressiveness boomed both in cocktails and in culture, a microcosm of rebellion blossoming in a smoke-filled room. While Prohibition insisted on a life of secrecy, an entire subculture formed around the drinks, and the revolution had begun. The lessons learned would linger long after the last drink was enjoyed. By the time the repeal of Prohibition came rolling along, the cocktail scene had grown too vibrant to snuff out. You see, even buried in the shadowy corners, creativity found help when nobody was supposed to even bring a bottle, proving that the human spirit is indeed effervescent, even if the drinks were not. As it turned out, the true legacy of cocktail culture during Prohibition wasn't just the act of drinking. It was about the art of making life taste just a bit sweeter, even when it was astonishingly sour. Meet the rum runners. Think of them as the unsung heroes or the anti-heroes, depending on your perspective. These daring sailors were the ones sneaking liquor from the Caribbean to the US, often braving cold waters while the authorities patrolled with an eye as sharp as their weapons. But did they care about safety? Of course not, so long as they had their stash. The draw of the high seas and high profits meant risking it all. Rum running? Just a casual Tuesday afternoon. Picture yourself on a small, weather-beaten boat, waves crashing against the hull, like an angry mafia boss demanding his money. The sultry winds of the Caribbean tantalize you with promises of prosperity and adventure as you lace your fingers around barrels of illicit rum, your heart pumping like a jazz band gone wild. Every mile thicker with anticipation and a side of adrenaline, you can almost taste the freedom and rebellion lacing the air. You feel like a modern-day pirate, but instead of treasure maps, your life revolves around clandestine routes and secret codes. Now let's not sugarcoat it. Being a rum runner wasn't all swashbuckling fun and games. The stakes were high, and the dangers were real. With every trip, these sea adventurers flew under the radar of the law, not unlike a child trying to hide a plate of cookies from their parents before dinner. The US Coast Guard was out in full force, dressed in their starched uniforms and packing enough firepower to sink a ship, while the rum runners were decked out in their favourite tattered attire, armed only with nerves of steel and their wits. They were the ultimate underdogs, fighting against a veil of legality with a level of bravado that would make a superhero envious. Ever wondered how they managed to outthink the authorities? Well, they operated on a vast network of smugglers who communicated using coded messages. One day, you might be the great white shark, only to find out by morning you've become the mystical dolphin. And don't forget the tight partnerships. Rum runners worked alongside an entire community of receivers, those who would accept their deliveries on the other side, transforming unmarked beaches into bustling black market hubs under the glimmer of the moonlight. Imagine a secret party with everyone waiting for the bartender to arrive, except this bartender is on a fishing boat loaded with liquid courage. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. Storms, law enforcement raids, and rival gangs could ruin a perfectly good shipment of what was essentially ocean-bound joy. Some might view it as a challenging game of dodgeball, where the stakes were way higher than just a bruised ego. There were tales of rum runners who had to throw their precious cargo overboard just to escape a pursuing Coast Guard cutter, their dreams sinking beneath the waves, all in the name of freedom. Talk about a tragic end to your rum-fueled adventure, and let's not forget about the infamous encounter with the organised crime syndicates. They were not just merciless enforcers of the law, but often served as partners and competitors in the shifty world of illegal liquor. Sometimes, the lines blurred between friend and foe. After all, the mob might applaud the rum runners for bringing in liquid gold, but heaven help you if you stepped on their toes by cutting into their profits. Their idea of negotiations involved a pistol, a demand, and your very last shipment. A little intimidating if you ask me. But what about the impact? These rum runners didn't merely fill Americans' glasses with laughter-inducing nectar. They played an important role in reshaping the very essence of culture during Prohibition. Their escapades helped to create a buzz about rum that paralleled the hottest songs topping the charts. Suddenly, a night out at a secret bar became a rite of passage, a symbol of resistance against oppressive regulations, and naturally an Instagram-worthy experience that you just couldn't miss. In a way, these clandestine sailors stitched the fabric of rebellion into the everyday lives of American citizens. They became spirits of hope, pun very much intended, reminding everyday folks that the fun didn't stop just because some politicians lost sight of good taste and freedom. The legacy of the rum runner is one woven with inescapable charm, frequent law-breaking, and a cultural shift that reshaped America's nightlife forever. So, as we lift our glasses to toast these daring souls, let's remember the rum runners for what they truly were, symbols of defiance, stubbornness, and grit. Cheers to the high seas and the wild ride of liquid rebellion, reminding us that even when life gets tough and the police are truly out to get you, there's always a way to keep the party alive. Prohibition wasn't just a social trial, it was the ultimate political hot potato. Politicians felt the heat, taken aback by public sentiment, party debates, and the growing unrest among citizens thirsty for their favourite drinks. Every pandemonium that erupted sounded like an anguished cry for liberty. Politicians who dared to speak out against prohibition were regarded as party poopers. As the tide turned, so did the political landscape. Elections were won or lost over opinions regarding booze. It was the centrepiece of political conversation in the flapper-draped cafes and smoke-filled back rooms. If you weren't wet, you might as well be a sour pickle. A sense of rebellion simmered beneath the surface, and those donning the dry badge often found themselves cornered by roving mobs of thirst-crazed citizens at their town halls. For the average American, the idea of government telling them whether they could sip a martini or down a whiskey cocktail sounded as ridiculous as suggesting they could no longer wear shoes. The public eventually began to see the dry campaign not as noble or virtuous, but as an example of government overreach. This was especially true as speakeasies blossomed like weeds in a garden. Before they knew it, the bars seemed safer than the local sheriff's office, which had become a fortress of moral indignation. You could interpret signs around the country asking wet or dry, like a game of charades, trying to figure out where on the cocktail spectrum people stood. With all this heated debate floating around like beer foam, politicians were on a constant balance beam, trying not to tip over into the waters of public dissatisfaction. Tables would shake as party members brought up the issue, making it more explosive than a shaken bottle of champagne. Congressional hearings often turned into theatrical spectacles, where the battle of opinions played out as if it were a scene from a particularly wild vaudeville. The boisterous boons and woes of Prohibition's impact echoed through the halls of power, driving home that this was not just a drinking problem, it was an all-out political circus. As time went by, the shift toward repeal began gathering momentum. The Great Depression loomed on the horizon, and it wasn't just the economy that needed a refresh. With people struggling to find jobs, people began asking if maybe, just maybe, a drink could provide some cheer. Politicians started considering the sheer amount of revenue that could potentially be generated by legalizing alcohol. Imagine that. Taxation on booze, a fantastic way to fund recovery. They finally saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and it wasn't coming from someone's homemade still. Quick maths revealed that if they could profit from pint-sized pleasures, they could help bolster an aching economy. Reform groups began to emerge, shifting their cries for liberty into calls for job creation through the brewing, bottling, and retailing of alcohol. Towns turned their fouilles toward a future where speakeasies transformed into licensed establishments, where children could once again learn to shimmy and shake without fear of hasty law enforcement bars and bad moonshine. And thus, the politicians who had once braved retribution now saw opportunity, spotting the lucrative fountain of sweet, sweet liquor just waiting to be tapped, legally. The call for repeal became a crescendo of voices, and political polarization shifted to support of the 21st Amendment, finally bringing the curtain down on the Prohibition Act. The roar of joy that erupted upon repeal resembled an orchestra of society, celebrating as the tensions and troubles surrounding alcohol collapsed like a badly made cocktail. Champagne flew as citizens poured out onto the streets, embracing the long-absent tradition of clinking glasses. Politicians rejoiced in the knowledge they'd finally embraced productive solutions rather than closing ranks against their constituents' yearnings. In the end, the impact of prohibition reached far beyond the boundaries of social gatherings and laws. It reshaped American politics, providing an important lesson about the delicate balance between governance, morality, and human desire. It taught the nation that when the people want to party, they'll find a way, even if it means spotlighting the hypocrisy of their leaders. While tucked in the annals of history alongside gangsters, flappers, and bathtub gin, the political reformation of the 1920s acknowledges how the determination for liberty shaped the very fabric of American democracy. So let's raise our glasses, now overflowing with the finest beverages, following the lessons learned of yesteryears, and toast to the freedom of choice. Cheers. Bootleggers were like the MacGyvers of the 1920s, employing clever techniques that would baffle the average citizen. They jerry-rigged stills, blowtorched copper piping, and created intoxicating concoctions using whatever they had on hand. Some concocted moonshine in the backwoods, while others made it a family affair, involving the children in their schemes. There's nothing quite like a homemade operation to build teamwork, and a sense of family bonding you didn't know you needed. One moment, you're playing hide-and-seek in the backyard, and the next you're stirring a bubbling vat of questionable liquids and hoping that flavour won't give your uncle's teeth a reason to unravel. Let's talk about ingredients for a second, because quite frankly, moonshine was the original. What's in this again? In the hands of an amateur, pretty much anything could become spirits. Corn, sugar, even rotten fruit was fair game. If it fermented, they were interested. As long as it bubbled, that was half the battle won. Who needs high-grade alcohol when a barrel of old apples and a touch of creativity will do? And let's not forget the essential element of surprise. One bootlegger might use a few spices to cover up the fact that what you were drinking tasted like it came straight from a gas station. But that didn't deter their passion. It only fueled it as they sipped whiskey that could cleanse the rust off a nail. Here's where the real ingenuity kicked in. These bootlegging maestros were combining science and desperation, like it was a science fair gone rogue. With a little chemistry knowledge, probably borrowed from a high school textbook, they created contraptions that would make even the keenest engineers raise an eyebrow. For instance, a simple coffee can could quickly turn into a makeshift still, heating up the fermented mash. and allowing the alcohol vapours to condense back into liquid form through a rubber tube directed straight into a bottle. It was like brewing tea, only this time your health had to pray you didn't sip the wrong kind of brew. And let's not overlook the cleverness behind the transportation of this illicit treasure. Those who were serious about their craft didn't simply toss their hooch into the trunk and hope for the best. No, sir. They made careful arrangements, hidden compartments in cars, false bottoms in barrels, and for especially daring deliveries they'd hop on the next train. Rum runners would pack their goods into freight trains, ensuring they moved with the speed of a kid chasing an ice cream truck, all while keeping an eye out for patrolling federal agents, who were basically the moonshiners' version of the boogeyman. Meanwhile, the more enterprising bootlegger turned their illicit activity into a numbers game, converting risky operations into worthwhile investments. They developed everything from simple advertising techniques, good old Uncle Ned's fine spirits, to brand strategies that would make today's entrepreneurs envious. They learned to market their moonshine like it belonged in a 5-star restaurant, even managing to convince potential customers that it was downright gourmet. They'd create labels with hints of nostalgia, pulling on the heartstrings of customers while hiding the questionable quality of the product. How about the gatherings? Those were an absolute frontier of fellowship, like the ultimate potluck minus the aunties gossiping over half-baked casseroles. Under the cover of night, families would gather for raucous parties, elbowing their way through wooden doors of speakeasies, a true testament to their innovations. Folks would sip from shoddy cups, lip-sync to jazz alongside reviving power ballads, and share in the camaraderie of sheer lunacy. Because what could be more unifying than half-tasting and heartily laughing at the disaster that may just take your head off? The bonds formed around that bubbling concoction became part of the lore. Children learned about the art of distilling before they could even ride a bike, with lessons on flavours and fermentation, mixed in with seated tales about family history woven through the rising steam. And who knew that realising your uncle's dreadful tendency to burn the biscuits, correlated with skill in crafting a still, would help you understand your family legacy? So, as we raise a glass, or ironically a mason jar, to the bootleggers of the 1920s and their incredible feats of chemistry, creativity and chaotic camaraderie, let us remember, they didn't just break the rules, they ingeniously redefined them. They turned Prohibition on its head and did what humans do best, adapt. And though their concoctions might have occasionally turned the evening into an emergency room adventure, they laid the foundation for the cocktail culture we relish today. Cheers. The speakeasy was the hottest ticket in town, though getting in felt like attending a high-stakes poker game. Eavesdropping patrons, backdoor alleys, and a password at the door defined the speakeasy experience. And while the thrill of bypassing Prohibition added a spark, the establishment's lifespan was as shaky as the drinks they served. The moment the police raided, chaos. Like a drama-filled soap opera, speakeasies would rise in success until their collapse became inevitable. Imagine this scene. A dimly lit space filled with whispers, laughter, and the sizzling sounds of questionable cocktails being shaken behind a hidden bar. To get inside, you had to navigate through a maze of dark corners and shifty characters, all while making sure you didn't catch the eye of an undercover cop. Speaking of catching eyes, the ladies were dressed to the nines, cloche hats perched jauntily, feathers bobbing with every twist and turn, while the gentlemen sported slick suits covering up their equally questionable souls. It was a place where everyone played a role, from the giggling flapper to the grizzled bartender who'd mastered the art of serving gin while maintaining a poker face that rivaled any high-stakes gambler. Oh, those drinks! Bartenders took their creativity to exhilarating highs, concocting cocktails that often tasted better than they had any right to. They had to do something with that dreadful bathtub gin after all. Combine it with fruit juice, bitters, and maybe a twist of citrus, and suddenly you had something that could warm your insides and slip you into jovial oblivion without the nasty aftertaste of regret. Well, at least not too much regret. Those drinks were like a delightful disguise, making you feel fancy while you got a quick buzz and dodged the feds like a game of legal discrimination duck, duck, goose. But the enchantment of speakeasies didn't last forever. As they flourished, authorities got smarter, gaining a keen sense of who frequented these forbidden establishments. Cops with street cred began infiltrating these establishments like wolves in sheep's clothing, and tension mounted every time a beer was served. Sooner or later, someone would crack, and the real drama began. Picture it. One moment you're waltzing around with a drink in hand, and the next you're diving behind the bar as if you were training for the Olympics. The sound of an ominous knock on the door sent patrons' hearts racing quicker than a speakeasy line dancer. Suddenly, the atmosphere transformed from a carefree gathering to a full-blown panic akin to your cat when it sees a cucumber. Patrons dashed for exits that were probably meant for the kitchen staff, scrambling like a bunch of football players trying to evade the opposing team. The bartender would hastily conceal the alcohol in a box he insisted was just special ingredients for homemade bread, while the police scoured the room for anyone who looked like they might have tasted liquor in the past week. In this chaotic game of hide-and-seek, clever escape routes became standard, with many speakeasies adopting elaborate systems to keep their operations secret. Some involved trapdoors that led out into the alleyways, while others placed hidden compartments under tables to stash their precious cargo of illicit booze. They got crafty, turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. Because what else could you expect from the sheer audacity bred by a Prohibition era? Yet with the mad race for survival, cracks began to show. The speakeasy culture turned increasingly violent as rival owners tried to lay claim to their territories, like the world's most boisterous game of Tetris. Fights broke out, gunfire rang in the night, and a new class of celebrity emerged. The crime boss who lived large off the pockets of a desperate public. Ironically, as speakeasies became more popular, their inevitable demise grew closer. When the 21st Amendment finally rolled around in 1933, people sang not just because they could drink legally again, but because they survived the harrowing ordeal of their speakeasy escapades. Let's be honest. Without the unexpected police raids, the adrenaline-fueled adventures, and the colourful personalities, what would we really remember? The memories lived on, serving as a cautionary tale that while the spirit of revelry can never be killed, it will always live on in dark corners, dynamic jolts of laughter, and, of course, a time when the hidden was the sensation of the era. Ultimately, the speakeasy didn't just serve drinks, it mixed together rebellion, camaraderie, and a hint of danger. They were the defiant heartbeats in a world of dry laws, where the laughter of those gathered echoed like a chorus of freedom, layered with memories that have yet to fade, even long after the last illegal drink was poured. So for everyone still daring enough to traverse darkened doors and hidden paths for the perfect sip of something a little rebellious, you owe your experience to those legends of the past who knew how to slip through the cracks. Cheers to the speakeasy, the epitome of audacity and delight. Everyone's heard tales of moonshine, the stuff considered liquid gold by desperate drinkers. But what's the truth behind it? Have you ever pondered what actually happens when there are too many cousins involved in making it? Oh yes, that rarest and most glamorous brand of alcohol can cause its drinkers not just to feel fuzzy, but potentially turn you into a confused pineapple on stilts. How did anyone survive the wild effects of bad ingenuity? Moonshine, at its essence, is a homemade spirit distilled in a manner that would make your high school chemistry teacher weep. This liquid courage often dealt with questionable methods. Think lots of trial and error, and usually more error than trial. It's like baking a cake using a recipe you scribbled on a napkin after 3 tequila shots. For every successful batch, there were probably 50 fails that left would-be drinkers regaling stories of squinting at their hallucinations or mistaking the family dog for a genie. In the backwoods distilleries, where creativity runs rampant and safety protocols are mere suggestions, the goal often was simple: create something that could compete with the legal stuff, without the pesky oversight and licensing. Picture your cousins huddled around a rusty barrel working as the bootlegging equivalent of a band of merry men, but less Robin Hood and far more, "Oops, is that a rat?" The recipe often depended on the availability of corn, sugar, or whatever sugar-filled substance was on sale that week. Ever heard of sweet tea moonshine? It's still a thing, and let me tell you, it can sneak up on you like an unexpected ancestor showing up at Thanksgiving. Now, let's talk about potency. Hold on to your hats. Moonshine has been known to pack a punch akin to getting tackled by a linebacker while you're standing on wobbly stilts. Many batches hover somewhere in the range of 80 to 100 proof, which means it's the liquid equivalent of a double shot of espresso spiked with Drano. Drinking moonshine can turn into the classic 3-round fight. First you're feeling good, then you're feeling great, and finally it's you against gravity, with gravity winning. There's a dark side to moonshine too, and I'm not talking about the hangovers or the questionable decisions that follow its consumption. Serious health risks abound due to the unregulated production. Lots of homemade concoctions can end up containing dangerous levels of methanol, which, I can assure you, is not something you want in your liquor. Methanol poisoning can result in anything from blindness to an untimely encounter with the Grim Reaper himself. Your cousin may have promised the good stuff, but he left out this tiny little detail. A couple of sips could leave you squinting at your own imminent demise, wondering if maybe a fizzy hard seltzer would have been a better choice. And despite all this, moonshine holds a certain romantic allure as the beverage of choice for the rebellious spirit. During Prohibition, it transformed from just homemade liquor into a symbol of defiance. Think about it. The very act of consuming moonshine was like thumbing your nose at the government while doing the Charleston. Wherever it was served, it brought people together, luring them into smoky speakeasies where the air reeked of sweetness and rebellion. Those who imbibed were part of a secret society where everyone emerged from their bubbles of prohibition with rosy cheeks and a sense of camaraderie that could rival a rock concert. As more people sipped and shared countless anecdotes of elaborate escapades induced by their beloved moonshine, the myths grew. Legends circulated about the miraculous effects of various secret recipes, ones that promised invincibility and led to elaborate tales of barn dances turning into slapstick sitcoms of ill-advised backflips gone wrong. The shenanigans only deepened the lore surrounding moonshiners, transforming mere drinkers into grandeur-bearing heroes, with tales extravagant enough to become the subject of future bank heist movies. So, the next time someone offers you moonshine, remember the mystique but proceed with caution. You're not just drinking, you're partaking in a rich, hysterically chaotic history that's literally rooted in survival against the odds. Who would have thought such a seemingly simple drink could unlock such a wild ride? As your taste buds dance through flavours that more closely resemble a chemistry experiment gone awry, lean back and soak in the absurdity that is moonshine, the illicit drink with a flair for the dramatic that turned countless kitchen corners into crime scenes and truly tested the limits of drinking culture. With the growing realisation that Prohibition wasn't containing violence but amplifying it, things began to change. By the time the 1930s rolled around, frustrations peaked and public opinion shifted like your drunk uncle trying to walk a straight line. What began as a noble crusade descended into chaos, and at last the government pulled the plug on the dry experiment. The final days of Prohibition brought a profound reckoning, and everyone, straight to the bar, was celebrating. Imagine the scene. Thousands of patrons erupting from their speakeasies as if they'd received a collective green light from the universe. It was like New Year's Eve in Times Square, except everyone was poorly dressed in their Sunday best and could still taste the bathtub gin on their breath. People rushed into the nearest bar, high-fiving bartenders while screaming, "Get me something that looks like a cocktail and tastes like freedom!" As the buzz grew louder, many began to scratch their heads and wonder what the point of all this was. The promise of a more disciplined society had not only failed, but had instead turned America into a playground for organised crime. Major cities down to quaint little towns found themselves entangled in violent mafia turf wars, with men in nice suits blasting Tommy guns like confetti at a parade. It was a montage of barking dogs, broken glass, and the stern disapproval of your overly conservative neighbour who really just wanted a good night's sleep without the soundtrack of mayhem. And let's not forget the heroic public service announcements. Suddenly, the very policemen who enforced the laws found themselves in a tug of war with the growing number of speakeasies. Imagine an officer chasing down a criminal only to accidentally crash a speakeasy party, receiving cheers instead of apprehension. Welcome to the world where the police became accidental party crashers, exposed to waves of laughter and communal defiance. In homes across the nation, dinner tables became battlegrounds for debates. For alcohol, against. Many families couldn't afford to lose another argument, especially with Grandma pouring another glass of her homemade hooch, proudly claiming, "It's medicinal, dear." Local governments were feeling the fiscal pinch as well. Chaos from bootlegging, raids, and hefty police paychecks left budgets screaming for help. Cities were losing out on a fortune thanks to the dry laws. The liquor tax was a cash cow that had been stuffed into the barn door wide open, and the farmer struck a deal for some gentleman's agreement. As public opinion shifted, those once staunchly against liquor began to consider the economic benefits of bringing back bars, arguing that re-legalizing alcohol was less about vice and more about restoring sanity to the financial chaos. Unsurprisingly, repeal became a rallying cry, fed by everyone from the fed-up families to enterprising liquor store owners. Did you think your friend startup gimmick was annoying? That's child's play compared to the social media equivalent of join the movement to repeal Prohibition. Politicians heard this loud and clear as the tide turned. The voice of the people vibrated louder than ever, a mix of desperate laughs, a rattling cash register, and enticing whispers about the possibilities of a drink after work again. Then came the infamous day in December 1933 when the 21st Amendment finally turned the tide. Yep, like a not-so-secret family reunion everyone had been waiting for, liquor flowed freely again. The nation erupted in cheers that could be heard across the land. Bars opened their doors like it was Christmas Eve, and customers rushed in, claiming their rightful spot at the bar as if they'd just travelled through a wormhole to paradise. Within moments, party banners emerged, and bars advertised half-priced happy hour deals that would have made even the most prudent accountant smile over a half-emptied tumbler. Strangely enough, it wasn't just the drinkers celebrating. Repeal offered a second chance for distilleries, breweries, and anyone else connected to the liquor trade. 6 months after the repeal, Americans were neck-deep in a blend of nostalgia and long-lost norm. From corner pubs to fine dining establishments, the bar became a sanctuary of social interaction, camaraderie and craft cocktails, much like summer BBQs are today. If summer BBQs involved cramped spaces filled with people arguing about the best form of barbecue sauce. Prohibition had failed, but in its failure it shed light on society's collective yearning for connection, the absurd lengths people would go to for a good drink, and an unquenchable thirst for liberty. Historical footnotes would immortalise the era, reminding future generations that, ultimately, not even a ban on booze could suppress the human spirit's thirst for joy, freedom, and, most importantly, a good cocktail. So let's raise a glass to those final days of Prohibition. May we never forget the chaos, the camaraderie, and the defiant laughter that echoed through the dimly lit halls of once-hidden bars. In a time when a basic gin and tonic could land you in trouble, bartenders got creative. With recipes guarded tighter than Grandma's meatloaf secret, concocting the perfect drink was an art form. They invented drinks so complicated, putting together a simple sandwich felt like child's play. Ingredients became coded messages, mixing became espionage, and through it all those bartenders had to keep a straight face, or risk blowing their cover. Those shifting shadows in the back rooms of speakeasies were teeming with inventive characters who had one mission: to make you forget the law and turn a mundane evening into a secret party. Let's take a moment to think about the ingredients in these drinks. While modern mixology offers carefully curated spirits and trendy mixers, Prohibition-era concoctions often included whatever could be found lying around. This meant bathtub gin, with questionable ingredients that might even include stuff usually reserved for windshield washer fluid, or suspected to be a cousin to ammonia. But here's the twist. Bartenders did not just make cocktails. They infused every drink with a little bit of rebellion, a pinch of revolutionary spirit, if you will. So imagine you walked into one of these speakeasies, and you're greeted with a drink called the French 75. Not named after a military cannon, but rather the nimble French spirit. It was crafted so expertly that even the hint of danger couldn't help but feel glamorous. Ever caught yourself wondering how much creativity it took to mask the horrible taste of bad alcohol? Take the classic daiquiri, a drink that couldn't have promised anything resembling quality. Bartenders substituted the traditional rum with whatever unidentifiable hooch they could get their hands on, blending in fresh fruit, sugar, and a healthy dose of bravado. Does it taste good, you might ask? Well, that depends on who you ask. If one drink knocked your socks off, you never knew if you'd be leaping toward the dance floor or flat on your back after sipping it. But that was all part of the thrill. The code word became, "Do you feel lucky?" as every drink carried a surprise. Now, let's talk about the different layers of social tension surrounding each sip. Every drink served was an act of defiance, a middle finger to the government. Sipping martinis or whiskey sours while trying to shush the neighbours felt like a scene straight from a gangster film. People didn't just drink to escape, they drank to embrace their freedom, and that energy flowed through the ice cubes in every glass, resonating like the jazz music wafting through smoke-filled air. Sure, they risked a fine or worse, a run-in with law enforcement, but for that pint of clandestine joy, they were ready to gamble it all. And let's not forget how the mixing process turned into a meticulous dance. Bartenders developed a knack for artful dodging, turning the act of shaking a cocktail into a performance. Imagine a mixologist juggling shakers while eyeing the door nervously, ready to dump their still elusive concoction into a waiting cup. Precision became paramount. Pouring spirits, squeezing citrus, and muddling herbs might have all looked like chaotic alchemy, but to the trained eye it was like watching a swashbuckler in action on the seas of Prohibition. Oh, and did I mention the use of code names? You didn't just order a whiskey sour. You'd lean closer, perhaps with a furtive glance over your shoulder, and ask for a cold drink with a twist of sunshine. What this did, besides drawing puzzled looks, was create an instant camaraderie among patrons, all in on the secret, aware of the unspoken code of living life on the edge of legality. It was a beautiful symphony of rebellion, wrapped in flamboyant citrus and hidden behind a winking bartender. By the time you sipped that first drink, you weren't just enjoying a cocktail, you were part of a grand theatrical performance, navigating the social tensions of an entire nation. Each flavour told a story, and every sip marked a moment of defiance against authority. As the drinks flowed and the music played, those secrets bubbled to the surface like the drinks poured into glasses, the ultimate celebratory ritual of flavour and fanciful escape. So, next time you raise your glass, remember the daring bartenders of yesteryears who crafted liquid histories, blending rebellion with the art of spirits until the lines between legal and illegal became blurred. Cheers to the innovators of Prohibition cocktails, the unsung heroes of a roaring era who taught America how to drink creatively and rebel, born into a cocktail shaker. Picture this: jazz wafting through smoky air while flappers twirled and cha-cha'd through the room. Music wasn't just entertainment, it became part of the fabric of resistance. Jazz in speakeasies wasn't just moderate enjoyment, it was cultural rebellion, a raucous move against the stuffy laws of prohibition. Musicians played their hearts out, the hidden rhythms giving life to the secret spaces where every note carried a revolution. It's no coincidence that the Roaring Twenties marked one of the greatest booms in jazz history, as the music embodied not only the thrill of nightlife, but also the yearning for freedom, the freedom to sip spirits and dance as if nobody was watching while the police were actively trying to shut the party down. Imagine stepping into a dimly lit speakeasy. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and promise, and you're met with the hypnotic sway of a double bass echoing through the space, perhaps accompanied by a piano that plays as if it has a mind of its own. A wild mix of laughter, chatter and clinking glasses creates an ambience that feels almost electric. The scene is alive with flappers, young women flaunting bobbed hair, fringed dresses, and an impressive disregard for societal norms. Men in sharp suits hold their drinks, some at the bar, while others spin partners across makeshift dance floors. Forget the fuss of formalities. This gathering dance is literally on the edge of rebellion. Jazz musicians themselves became instant legends. Picture Louis Armstrong, trumpet in hand, his smile lighting up the room even when darkness loomed outside. He wasn't just a musician. He was a beacon of joy while the law criminalized merriment. His improvisational skills inspired others to create on the spot, breaking away from traditional conservative structures, much like the music he played. When every note blended into the next, it didn't just sound great. It felt like a declaration of independence, each performance a sonic challenge to authority. We refuse to be defined by your restrictions. But amid the fun, life was still precarious. A quick glance at the door would have you on high alert. A raid could happen at any moment. Patrons held their glasses close, ready to dash at the slightest sound of trouble. A police siren, a loud knock, or a suspicious shuffle in the street. So why would you risk it all for a night of jazz? Well, because the thrill made it worth it. You felt like you were living outside the confines of everyday life. A secret world where jazz served as both an escape and a weapon against the oppressive tides of the era. It's as if every musician played for freedom and every dancer celebrated it. The vibrant allure of jazz wasn't just about the notes. It was about the stories that each tune told. The rhythm spoke of heartbreak and joy, rebellion and celebration. Some numbers were slow and sultry, reflecting the challenges of living in a society where prohibition deprived you of your favourites. Others were upbeat and got everyone up on their feet like a friendly nudge saying, "Sure, you might be breaking the law, but laughter and rhythm are free." The beats spread like wildfire, and before long, speakeasies turned into meeting points for more than just drinking. They became cultural hubs where politics and social change were discussed amidst the backdrop of rhythmic melodies. Open discussions about civil rights, gender equality, and the impending end of Prohibition all thrived in these jazz-infused atmospheres. Note by note, these artists became the voice of a generation who used the freedom of expression in a time of restrictions. As the end of Prohibition loomed, jazz found new life beyond speakeasies. What started underground became mainstream, a true testament to the resilience and creativity of its players and audience. Musicians like Duke Ellington and Billie Holiday began to fill greater venues and leave their indelible mark within the American music scene. They took their sounds, born of rebellious nights and clandestine gatherings, into concert halls, and the legacy of jazz seeped into the very DNA of American culture. So the next time you hear a jazz tune, take a moment to remember the life behind the notes. It was born from the depths of resistance, getting countless souls to break free from ordinary constraints, all from the very shadows of a time when music and laughter were the strongest statements anyone could make. In those smoky speakeasies, jazz wasn't just a genre, it was a legacy of rebellion that declared, the party isn't over, and liberty is always worth dancing for. When Prohibition struck, some celebrities jumped into the fray, fighting back through glamour-infused, sugar-coated tactics. Old Hollywood glamour met underground partying like no one had ever expected. Imagine A-list stars waltzing past police officers, laugh tracks embedded in every secret Jack and Jill party. Sinclair Lewis, Scott Fitzgerald and other influential figures raced alongside the underground liquor trade, each step echoing like the rhythms of jazz. And oh, how they loved the drama. With flappers in their dazzling dresses and gangsters in slick suits, these high-profile figures turned speakeasies into the hottest ticket in town. But let's pause a moment to appreciate the absurdity of it all. This was a time when celebrated writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald were rewriting literary history and simultaneously guzzling gin in secret haunts, the kind of contradictions only the jazz age can serve up. It's like being told you can't eat cake and then somehow finding yourself in a bakery, fork in hand, frosting smeared like war paint on your face. Amid the haze of smoke and intrigue, these celebrities became more than just patrons. They were the very lifeblood of the speakeasy culture. Take, for instance, the incredibly talented singer and actress Josephine Baker. With a banana skirt and a jaw-dropping performance style, she easily brought glamour to these hidden spots, captivating audiences who were just starved for a good time, literally and figuratively. She didn't shy away from the jazz clubs, bringing an air of flamboyance that turned every evening into an unforgettable spectacle. Imagine her singing beneath the soft glow of hidden chandeliers, while patrons nervously glanced outside, waiting for the blade of justice, or at least a nosy cop to spoil the fun. It's hard to think of a more vibrant scene than Baker, jazz blending in with the hum of nervous laughter while hoping to keep the police at bay. Now, let's consider the notorious party-loving playwright, Eugene O'Neill. This guy didn't just write about life, he lived it. O'Neill dove headfirst into the speakeasy scene, mingling with other literary legends while learning that the only thing better than writing about life struggles was experiencing them over a couple of illegal cocktails. Long Day's journey into night takes on a whole new meaning in a dimly lit bar while knocking back shots of bathtub gin, doesn't it? Between dramatic pauses, you'd find him surrounded by aspiring starlets and shadowy figures who looked just as at home discussing existential dread as they did hiding a flask behind their silk scarves. And then there was the king of comedy, the iconic Charlie Chaplin. Picture this, the silent film star slipping into a speakeasy, his moustache intact, with a satirical smirk plastered on his face. He didn't need words to command an audience's attention. His mere presence was enough. You can almost imagine Chaplin alluding to Prohibition's absurdities, blending humour and rebellion as he tangoed through the crowd. In the ironic flip of history's script, this comic genius evaded the law with the same graceful precision he exhibited on the big screen. Let's not forget the legends of jazz themselves. Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong laid down the soundtrack of this roaring era as they played smoky clubs filled with the scent of cheap cologne and a questionable amount of homemade liquor. Their music was both a celebration and a quiet act of defiance in these secretive hideouts, where every note bobbed and weaved like everyone's jitterbugging feet. As cops patrolled, the sound of vibrant horns offered a delicious distraction, a delightful siren call that kept spirits high while the law pursued an unwinnable game of hide-and-seek. But celebrity involvement in speakeasies wasn't just about the glitz and glamour. It was about how the rich and famous used their status to keep the parties alive. They hid the liquor in plain sight, using elegance as a disguise. Where the average Joe might have to scrounge for a hidden bottle, a starlet could wink at the right person and have a custom cocktail delivered on a silver platter. Talk about a VIP experience. As Prohibition began to fade, the stars of the 1920s left behind a legacy of resilience, a belief that even the strictest laws couldn't extinguish the hunger for joy and liberty bubbling beneath the surface. And in many ways, it's thanks to these bold figures that we remember the Prohibition era, not just for its oppressive laws, but for the intoxicating allure of rebellion, after, and those late-night escapes filled with unforgettable memories. So, raise a glass to the celebrities of the speakeasy scene, forever immortalised in our collective memory, and definitely not lost on the dance floors of our dreams. With the repeal of Prohibition, many wondered if anything had really changed. Sure, bars reopened, glasses clinked once more, and people celebrated like it was New Year's, dreaming of champagne. But what followed was remarkably different. A rush to license and regulate alcohol turned into a social justice issue. This shaped a society grappling with the lessons learned, even if they involved a few too many hangovers along the way. As you peel back the layers of this post-prohibition world, the first thing that strikes you is the joy of choice. The feeling of walking into a bar without looking over your shoulder was exhilarating, like finding a long-lost sock that matches the one you're wearing, a small but profound victory. But let's be honest, that feeling of freedom came with its own set of ridiculous complications. Navigating the labyrinth of newly minted laws, regulations and taxes was its own form of intoxication. Imagine a world where ordering a drink required you to read a small novel on local ordinances and regulatory compliance. It's like trying to enjoy a fine wine while balancing your taxes and your sanity. And then there were the hangovers. Oh, the hangovers. A generation that had spent the better part of a decade sneaking sips out of poorly crafted flasks suddenly unleashed a thirst that could rival an Olympic athlete's training regimen. The revitalised drinking culture resulted in more than just casual parties. Emerging patterns of overindulgence left countless souls swearing off rye whiskey for all of eternity, or at least until the next holiday party. It was a time when aspirin sales skyrocketed, and perhaps even Tylenol thought they were winning big. Who knew that hangover relief could become a booming industry overnight? Meanwhile, the alcohol industry underwent a transformation of mythic proportions. Large corporations rushed to fill the apparently insatiable demand for booze. Gone were the days of questionable bathtub gin and clandestine stills producing erratic concoctions. Commercial distilleries took over, and suddenly the phrase craft beer became less about individual artistry and more about hopping on the marketing wave. You've got giant companies throwing money at advertising in a bid for every thirsty soul's attention. Picture oversized neon signs advertising premium booze that lit up the blocks of your once quiet neighborhood. Everybody wanted a piece of the action, hoping to ride the wave of consumers eager to get back to social drinking without the fear of being raided by government agents. But early on, not everyone was thrilled about the free flow of alcohol. Some temperance advocates scrambled to repurpose their influence, concerned that all this drinking would lead back to drunkenness, poverty, and scandal. Oh, the scandal! To them, the precedents set during Prohibition revealed a society that lacked impulse control. Imagine someone earnestly arguing about the dangers of having free weekends as if they were discussing the pros and cons of an asteroid crashing into Earth. It's eyebrow-raising stuff. But America was too busy to care, as drinks flowed and laughter filled the air like confetti during a surprise party. As it turned out, for some, the battle against alcohol was far from over. Politicians began clamouring to fix the new drinking culture, spouting theories and grand visions as they sat nervously clutching flasks of their own. New laws emerged, but often felt like slapping a band-aid on a gaping wound. The spirit of regulation was like trying to glue a bouquet of flowers together. Pretty in theory, but ultimately impossible in practice. Local governments started rewriting their blueprints for maintaining order, often implying that while humans might need to drink, they also needed to do so responsibly. Definition. Very, very carefully. And what about the mobsters of yore, the ones who thrived during Prohibition? Well, they needed some fresh hustle as the streets of organised crime emptied. Some found new opportunities in legal businesses, transforming themselves from barons of bootleg into legitimate entrepreneurs, while others faded into obscurity, as if they had never existed. There is something poetic about the figure that once instilled fear, now trying to sell you a fine selection of olive oil. Who knew the second act would involve artisanal products? Ultimately, as the liquor poured freely and the society adjusted, America found itself at a crossroads of sorts. The landscape was transformed not just by the introduction of accessible alcohol, but by the very fabric of how people interacted with it. New social norms emerged, ones that glossed over every spilled cocktail, every secret rendezvous, and even every spontaneous karaoke session. Because at the end of the day, who could resist the all-too-familiar urge to raise a glass and toast to freedom, laughter, and perhaps the loud last call that echoed through a happy, liberated nation? Cheers to that awakening. As we meander through the past, it's crucial to realise how the chaos of Prohibition shaped not just our drinking habits, but perceptions of rights and regulations. Each misstep shows that legality isn't always aligned with morality. History teaches us a lesson or two about the veil of constraints, revealing how the human spirit always craves liberty, whether it's seeking truth or simply enjoying a cocktail. Just look at those who took to the streets for their drink. It was as if the nation collectively decided that red tape was for sissies, and that raw determination needed to be bottled up and shared, preferably while dancing to jazz. Picture a world where the government deemed alcohol a sin, whispering that your neighbour could be drinking in their basement while you stared despondently from your kitchen window, clutching a mug of lukewarm herbal tea. You see, the goal was to encourage a more virtuous society, but reality had other plans. Instead, what transpired was a glorious cocktail of rebellion, where speakeasies sprouted like weeds in the cracks of sidewalks, and the art of mixing drinks became a clandestine craft, complete with secret recipes that would make any modern bartender raise an eyebrow, or three. Let's talk about the rebellious spirit that emerged during this peculiar time. Imagine strutting into a hidden bar where everyone's asked to check their morals at the door, while they down questionable concoctions offered up by the most inventive mixologist of the day. They would serve drinks that had you questioning if the taste was more reminiscent of toilet bowl cleaner or an audacious apple pie. But hey, desperate times call for desperate measures, and if you needed to mask the taste of cheap gin, you might as well throw in some mint and a sparkler for good measure. Amidst all this, the underground economy blossomed. Entrepreneurs rose like shiny bubbles in a glass of champagne, crafting illicit product and bold business strategies that could only exist in the shadows. This wasn't just a spirited game of cat and mouse. This was entrepreneurialism with a side of risk. We learned something about human nature. When it comes to restrictions, the innate desire for freedom will find a way, whether through back alleys or cleverly disguised labels on crates. Supply always met demand, even if it meant risking it all for the taste of a well-made Manhattan. Yes, the age of Prohibition brought forth unintended consequences. The arrival of organised crime cast a long shadow over an otherwise vibrant culture, and it didn't take long for the speakeasies to turn into denizens of danger. Here, the charming personalities behind the bar had a few sketches of their own, the kind that could raise eyebrows and sometimes even fists, with an angry cop asking questions that were met with stony silence and a harrowing look. Crime didn't just raise the stakes, it introduced an entire underbelly of risk where the line between right and wrong blended about as seamlessly as gin and tonic. But perhaps the shadow of Prohibition revealed deeper moral questions. What does it mean to legislate personal behaviour? As folks battered the doors of their insatiable craving for drink, Prohibition posed significant questions about societal freedoms and the power of the individual versus the authority of the government. Today, we draw on those lessons with wistful smiles, often forgetting that the past is a living entity, urging us to interrogate the choices we make and the regulations imposed upon our modern lives. Fast forward to contemporary society, and we see remnants of these struggles echoing through discussions over issues like marijuana legalization and the debate over alcohol consumption ages. The conversations we have today can easily be traced back to this Prohibition era. The collective yearning for autonomy, whether it's for drinking, toking, or simply living how we wish, remains a vital thread in the fabric of American life. Those clandestine gatherings and jazzy roars remind us that when the spirit of freedom is bottled up, people will find creative ways to pop that cork and let the celebratory chaos flow. In the end, the lessons learned from Prohibition remain etched not just in the annals of history, but in the very choices we make today. The pursuit of liberty dances with the constraints of laws, turning the mundane act of drinking into symbolic freedom, painting a picture of what it means to be human. Cheers to those who risked everything for a sip, reminding us that while rules may bind, our spirits remain untamed. While the headlines often favoured the men, organised crime and gangsters, the Prohibition era spotlighted women like never before. They brewed in back rooms, ran speakeasies, and fought tirelessly for their newfound freedom. Women dropped their proper images, leading the charge both behind bars and on the front lines of social movements. As the brazen flappers took to the streets, they sculpted a narrative that transformed a generation. Picture it. Women in stunning beaded dresses and cloche hats shimmying across wooden dance floors, sipping cocktails and smoking elegantly from long ivory cigarette holders. Was this some kind of fantastical dream? Hardly. This was reality for many women who, feeling the constraints of pre-Prohibition society, seized newfound liberties with gusto. As Prohibition took effect in 1920, some women decided that simply sitting at home and sighing over a faded painting was not for them. Instead, they ventured out into the clandestine world of speakeasies, transforming these hidden watering holes into not just places for illicit drinking, but also hubs of empowerment. Think about it. secret knock codes, hushed whispers, and the thrill of living life on the edge. It was like an underground carnival of cocktails, and women were right at the forefront. They took on roles as bartenders and owners, balancing precariously on high heels while concocting delightful drinks to keep the masses entertained. The creativity, the audacity. It was a revolution fueled by gin. But these women weren't just swirling cocktails, they were also organising, strategizing and mobilising. Activism blossomed during this time as women's suffrage movements converged with anti-prohibition sentiment. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, initially focused on promoting temperance, was joined by countless other women who now realised that if they could successfully deny the existence of any bar serving alcohol, they could also combat various injustices, the disenfranchisement of women, labour rights, even civil rights. Who knew that the hunt for gin could morph into significant pushes for social change? Talk about multitasking. Along the way, our heroines, better known as flappers, challenged conventional beauty standards and social norms. No more corsets. Instead, they donned stylish bobbed hair, short skirts, and a sense of daring that echoed some sort of jazz-infused battle cry. These women not only spun around speakeasies, but dismantled the iron grip of societal expectations. They lit the way for later generations, reminding everyone that a woman could own her success, own her appearance, and most importantly, own her right to choose. It's a wonder the term girl power wasn't coined back then. It was practically a reality. But let's not overlook the incredible contributions of women behind the scenes. Those clever entrepreneurs who turned their homes into secret dens of iniquity were not just bartenders, they were alchemists of rebellion. The ladies mixing those questionable spirits and clandestine cocktails were often using recipes passed down through generations or experimenting boldly with whatever they could scrounge up. Homemade recipes sometimes called for some very dubious ingredients, but let's be honest, some tasted fantastic, while others were guaranteed to ensure an unforgettable evening, with or without your taste buds intact. Moreover, let's not forget the bravery and resilience displayed by women who took on dangerous roles as smugglers. Consider the legendary women who commandeered boats, braving floods, fog and law enforcement, all with a cool head and a heart full of daring. They were like the Wonder Women of the waterway. Movement across state lines required nerve and strategy, and these trailblazing women brought their unique charm, cunning and skills to the table regularly. Whether it was knee-deep in murky waters or scaling cliffs with crates of whiskey on their backs, they were more than just figures of convenience. They were vital cogs in the bootlegging machine. As the Prohibition era came to an end in 1933, women didn't simply retreat back to their homes or return to proper lives. Instead, they carried their lessons and friendships from those years into a new era, this time armed with the understanding that their voices mattered. In a time when society didn't want them to drink, organise or be seen, they insisted on showing the world that they could create movements and friendships that outlasted even the dry laws of the land. When we think of Prohibition today, let's tip our hats to these remarkable women. They danced, they negotiated, they created, and yes, they challenged authority, all while drinking somewhat dubious alcohol brewed in the basements of America. Their legacy is a testament to the powers of intellect, skill, and of course, a well-crafted cocktail. So here's to the unseen contributions of women during Prohibition. May we always remember their laughter, their resilience, and all the times they raised a glass to freedom. Fast forward to today, and Prohibition remains a rich vein for pop culture. From films to books, the era has been romanticised, trivialised, and mythologized. As we revisit those tales of gangsters, undercover agents, and secretive bars, audiences are reminded that history has a way of resurfacing. while the drinks, unfortunately, just might taste better today, thanks to modern innovation. Picture this: the glamour of 1920s speakeasies slinking its way into your favourite films, where suave anti-heroes, trench coats and femme fatales weave a glitzy narrative amidst the shadows. You find yourself glued to the screen, wondering if every flapper raiding the dance floor has just slipped gin from her garter. Talk about multitasking! Creative storytellers have seized upon this chaotic epoch with the fervour of a bootlegger trying to double their stash. Just think of films like Chicago, where jazz and quick feet merge into stunning choreography while reminding you that tomorrow may indeed bring a police raid. Or the gritty stylings of Boardwalk Empire, a series that introduces you to a world where every backroom deal has the potential to go sideways, possibly resulting in someone polishing off their favourite baseball bat in a less than lethal fashion. In these stories, zealous law enforcement officers don't just serve warrants, but also become characters in their own right, complicating the classic good versus evil narrative with their struggles against corruption and moral dilemmas. You could call it a Prohibition-era soap opera complete with cocktails. But make no mistake, the reality was far stranger than fiction. While Hollywood has ingeniously curated a narrative dripping with subtext and spectacle, the truth was often more disheartening than a bar with no booze. During Prohibition, the United States didn't descend into a vintage cocktail paradise. Rather, crime surged. Gangsters ruled the roost, and genuinely terrifying tales of car chases over stolen shipments were more common than hearing cheers at a bar. Even the likes of Al Capone didn't buy into the classic narrative. He had his fingers in every proverbial pie imaginable and revamped the booze trade until the spigots of quick cash became a fountain of fear poured straight into the streets. A notable example made waves in the literary realm: F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Here Fitzgerald captured the frustration of the Roaring Twenties, the era drowned in dreams and cocktails at the altar of excess. The glitz and glamour enveloped readers as Jay Gatsby threw extravagant parties in his mansion, all presumably fueled by illegal beverages. But let's not forget, beneath the layers of sequins, these characters were part of a world teetering on the edge of lawlessness, just like balancing on a two-legged stool while sipping moonshine. The dazzle of Prohibition has also crept into the realm of video games. Titles like L.A. Noire throw players into a chaotic Los Angeles where moonshine is but a button click away and the baddies are lurking down every alley, fueled by fedoras and dubious morals. Gamers immerse themselves in historical settings, solving crimes while enjoying a virtual drink or two, hopefully without going full gangster mode. Have you ever player-locked yourself to a rooftop, cautiously observing the moonshine trade, while an ominous soundtrack sets the mood? Just be careful, those rivals have a penchant for rough landings. Even documentaries have embraced the allure that Prohibition offers, modern storytelling digging up the dirt and grime with factual precision. These films reveal the true human stories behind the crime streak, enlightening audiences on the everyday lives hustled along by ordinary people desperate for a drink and a little slice of freedom. However, they shine a light on the dissonance, reminding you how the pursuit of happiness turned into a cocktail of chaos instead. As the reality of the dry years and all the mischief unfolds in modern media, it's clear Prohibition never truly died. It slinks around every corner, reminding us that the past often weaves its way into our collective psyche. History turned this tale of loss and laughter into rich narratives bolstered by the complexities of human nature, while the drinks we sip today continue to transcend borders and generations. So here's to Prohibition as it sways from the gritty past to a vibrant pop culture creation that dances its way into the hearts and possibly the heads, of a new generation. It's time to sort the legends from the lore in this thrilling game of alcohol-themed myth-busting. Yes, those bathtub gins did originate from real places, and those songs about moonshiners tap into a historical truth. But what parts were exaggerated, and how did folklore emerge from the swirling criminal culture of Prohibition? We'll dive into these fabulous tales and see their colourful origins. First up, let's raise a glass to bathtub gin, the kitchen's San Francisco treat. Legend has it that this homemade concoction could blind you, turn you into a howling beast, or set you on a path of spiritual enlightenment, depending on what you believed and how much you consumed. The reality. While bathtub gin did flow freely, often produced in unsanitary conditions that made a college dorm kitchen look like a 5-star establishment, the horror stories were sometimes a little overhyped. Sure, the alcohol was strong enough to ignite the fuel in an old jalopy, but most bathtub gin was actually fairly palatable if you were brave enough to dip your cup into the murky waters. Think of it more as a weekend warrior experience than a medieval chalice. Impactful, but not likely to leave you toothless. Unless, of course, you mistakenly ingested a chunk of rotting fruit. Now, let's pour some attention on those wild tales of moonshine. Often glammed up in TV series and movies, moonshiners were portrayed as rugged rebels clad in denim overalls, racing through forests in souped-up cars with their bottles clinking like tiny wind chimes. The truth, while still thrilling, was a tad different. Sure, many moonshiners knew how to navigate country roadways like pros, but it wasn't always high-speed chases on dirt paths. More often than not, they were as crafty as clever raccoons, with their stills hidden away in the woods, far from prying eyes, but occasionally not too far from inquisitive deputies. In the end, many moonshiners were merely looking to supplement their meagre livelihoods, creating home brews that could warm both the heart and one's pocketbook. Next up is the infamous speakeasy, a shadowy realm said to be filled with jazz-soaked music and dancing flappers, all tantalizingly whispering behind doorways covered with a velvet rope. And while this is not entirely untrue, we have to discuss the real deal, those who operated under the increasingly paranoid eyes of the law. Forget about the glamorized vision you get from films. Being a speakeasy proprietor could mean engaging in constant subterfuge, fear of raids, and being forced to come up with rather inventive drinks on the fly, instead of just the well-known swig of whiskey. Believe it or not, many actual speakeasies were simple, hole-in-the-wall establishments catering to locals who prefer to drink in stealth mode, rather than extravagant nightclubs where the chandeliers may as well have been made from crystal moonshine jugs. A good night required a watchful eye, a back door, and the occasional chat with a dubious connection who could steer dangerous attention away. And who could forget about the noble law enforcement officers, those brave souls sworn to uphold the safety of a nation drowning in liquor? They were often depicted as bumbling fools, caught in comical efforts to crack down on the chaos. While some departments indeed found themselves stretched thin, the Keystone Cops-like portrayals missed the gritty realities of officers navigating a world brimming with crime syndicates, bribes, and violence. The bad guys didn't just disappear when the sun set. Law enforcement was often stuck in the middle of a game of chess, sometimes filled with backstabbing, other times just trying to stay alive, while those they pursued made their lives as complicated as the recipes for bathtub gin. Finally, we must acknowledge the legends of celebrity involvement in Prohibition. Contrary to the belief that everyone who enjoyed a night out was secretly mingling with the likes of mobsters, prohibitionists and flapper queens, the reality was a little less coordinated. Just because you were a star didn't mean you were secretly moonlighting as a gin distributor. In fact, many showed their disdain for Prohibition by fighting back against the establishment, albeit in their own unique ways, often through high-profile cocktail parties laden with bootlegged flavour and flair. Imagine glamorous personas tossing back illegal drinks, while the public remained blissfully unaware about which famous face was sipping on what through their diamond-encrusted cocktail glasses. So, as we sift through these myths and facts about the Prohibition era, one thing becomes clear. The stories told over the decades not only serve to entertain, but also to protect the very spirits that each generation guards with pride. The glitter of the speakeasy, the thrill of bootlegger ingenuity, and the humour in a history laced with shadow and cocktails remind us of both the absurdity and the resilience of people navigating an era shaped by contradictions. So the next time you sit down for a drink, take a sip and toast to the wild tales of Prohibition. Some truths swim with the tide, while others find a comfy home on the rocks of history. As we reflect on this wild ride through Prohibition, it begs the question, what have we really learned? You may or may not be surprised that people always want to drink, that's the bottom line. The era was a whirlwind of experimentation, and once you've stirred the pot, you can't unthaw the ice. So let's raise a glass to the ingenuity and resilience of those who once danced under darkened rooftops. Here's to the storytellers, the drinkers, and the dreamers. The truth is, Prohibition was more than just a dry spell. It was a colossal party masquerading as a nationwide headache. For a solid 13 years, from 1920 to 1933, Americans on every sidewalk and street corner found a way to navigate the absurdity of living without booze. Imagine families huddled together in their living rooms, with Mum pouring bathtub gin into mason jars as Dad attempted to read the news, only to become increasingly more newsworthy with each tipple. It's like a sitcom without a laugh track, where everything became slightly more chaotic the more everyone drank. In those secretive, candlelit establishments known as speakeasies, you could find everything from jazz bands getting wild to patrons tight-lipped about the shenanigans taking place. Music dripped from these hidden walls while drinks flowed like the Mississippi. But let's be honest, any drink below ground level could easily be a recipe for disaster. Mixologists became scientists, leaning heavily into their craft as they attempted to salvage flavours that would have perplexed even the most intrepid modern-day connoisseur. What was that strange ingredient that made everything taste like sour apples and regret? Oh, just some bathtub gin and a hint of, liquid courage, they'd respond, rolling their eyes at the irony. And how about those brave souls who flouted the law, the bootleggers? These characters were often more daring than most superheroes on the silver screen. They manoeuvred through police checkpoints as if auditioning for a dodgeball team, tossing crates of illegal alcohol into competing cars over fences with the dexterity only decades of practice could yield. Their motto: why follow the law when you can break it and still get paid? The audacity. Think of it as the original "Can you top this?" bar challenge, where the stakes weren't just embarrassment, but your freedom. As we sit back today, reminiscent of the laughter and chaos that ensued, it's clear that Prohibition was a testament to the human spirit's need for rebellion. It highlighted the lengths to which people will go to reclaim their pleasures. This era inspired countless tales of criminal masterminds, ladies in flapper dresses, and shady barons of booze who shaped an entire culture of underground drinking. Let's not forget the role of women during this time. They flung back bottles of gin and champagne while simultaneously tearing down social norms, exhibiting courage in the face of a society that preferred them docile. Prohibition also gave birth to iconic symbols in our culture, like cocktails. Each drink carried within it the spirit of the times, serving as a delicious reminder of just how far the country was willing to go to avoid sobriety. The gin fizz, the mint julep, and that infamous mojito As they swirled together in shared laughter or quiet desperation, the stories continued to flow. Even in the face of ludicrous legislation, Americans became masters of cocktail masks, mixing whatever was available in creative ways. Recipes became shrouded in secrecy, occasionally leaving a few dysfunctional pals stumbling through the door while quarrelling about who had the better recipe. Yet, as the Wild Party eventually ended in 1933 with the 21st Amendment's repeal, it left behind a distinct legacy. Alcohol consumption returned, restrictions eased, but the ghostly echoes of jamming jazz, hidden revelries, and homemade brews lingered in the air like traces of smoke from a once thriving speakeasy. They say history has a way of repeating itself, and with the groundwork laid during Prohibition, subsequent generations sought their own methods of enjoyment and rebellion, now with craft breweries and artisanal cocktails. So here's to the irony of it all. For as much as some politicians and moral crusaders attempted to impose restrictions, the creativity and resourcefulness of the people would always outshine ignorance and suppressive laws. What was once a dark chapter became an intoxicating legacy that reminds us of our shared quest for enjoyment and community. Let's consider this moment, raising our glasses, not just for the courage shown during Prohibition, but for the spirit of audacity, laughter, and tenacity that will continue to seep into the stories we share. As the jazz notes fade, our spirits lift, and we toast to freedom beneath the stars. As we wrap things up, one thing stands clear. Prohibition didn't kill the party, it merely reshaped it. Today we celebrate its very history not with a straightforward drink, but with a splash of nostalgia. From the speakeasy secrets to colourful cocktails, we've inherited an appreciation for the good times and the murky past that brought us here. Embrace the caffeine buzz of laughter as history dances through our glasses, reminding us why we sip, laugh, and toast to freedom. Let's take a moment to appreciate the paradox of it all. Prohibition, a failed experiment aimed at curtailing alcohol consumption, inadvertently led to a boom in everything from creative mixology to the rise of an underground society. Think about it. Countries around the world still can't quite keep a lid on people's thirst, can they? The moment things are restricted, there's an almost primal urge to break free and indulge. It's as if the universe says, you want it? Good luck getting it. And naturally, when there's a challenge, people will come together with ingenuity and resourcefulness that museum curators would envy. Take the spirit of the speakeasy as an example. Establishments that once thrived behind the facade of secret doors and hidden staircases now offer themed nights with vintage jazz music and cocktails that would dazzle even the most discerning palate. They preserve more than just a drink. They preserve the spirit of rebellion. Walking into a modern speakeasy is as close as you'll come to time travel. The dim lights, the sultry tunes, and the clandestine feel of sitting behind a velvet curtain transport you to a time when every sip was sweetened by the thrill of defiance. It's as if our ancestors are joining us for a round, a toast to having lived through the worst while still managing to savour the best. And cocktail culture. Before Prohibition, cocktails were barely a blip on the radar. If you walked into a bar, your choices were limited to whatever lukewarm beer or gin they had lying around. But as thirsty revellers sought refuge from the restrictions hoisted upon them, bartenders transformed into alchemists. They began mixing spirits with all manner of fruits, juices, and daredevil ingredients that were both legal and slightly less so. The gin fizz, the sidecar, the old-fashioned, these quintessential drinks were created in the crucible of Prohibition and remain staples today. In fact, learning how to make the perfect cocktail can feel like engaging in a rite of passage. Everyone's eager to share the secret ingredient, be it fresh herbs or a spritz of unapproved soda pop. You've not really lived until you've shaken a cocktail in homage to your great-great-grandmother's defiance. Now, juxtapose that fancy cocktail with the eccentric contraptions that bootleggers crafted in their attempts to circumvent the law. Ever heard of a flash distiller? They were the hidden gems of the Prohibition era, along with other amazing DIYs, contraptions that made a homebrew feel like it was crafted in a lab. The audacity of these amateur scientists deserves applause. They took household items and turned everyday kitchens into hatcheries of illicit elixirs. Next time you complain about your dinner prep, remember that the great-grandfather of your neighbour was possibly hiding a distillery behind the mashed potato pot. Furthermore, the impact of Prohibition extended beyond just alcohol. It shaped social norms and cultural landscapes, inspiring everything from jazz music to literature. Artists, writers, and musicians thrived in this atmosphere, crafting narratives that fed into the collective sigh of rebellion while simultaneously celebrating freedom. You can practically hear the jazz notes dancing in the back alleys, the harmonica echoing stories of love, betrayal, and liquid courage. Every note was a proclamation that freedom would not be silenced. And what's more, the women of the Prohibition era carved a unique space for themselves, flying in the face of traditional roles as they became distillers, bar owners, and even mobsters. Flappers sipping gin while advancing the conversation on women's rights marked an era of cultural contribution often glossed over. Every bead of sweat in those back rooms contributed to the conversations we continue today about equality and freedom. So, when you see that cocktail or mocktail on your table, acknowledge that behind that drink lies a legacy rich with resilience, rebellion, and irrepressible spirit. So, lift that glass high. In a world where the remnants of Prohibition linger on in whispers, whether through the tongue-in-cheek tales of your local bartender or the collection of spirits in your cabinet, we are all partakers in an ongoing celebration, a shout of collective defiance against any power that seeks to limit our choices. Cheers to the legacy of Prohibition, a time when laughter, ingenuity, and resistance blended into the ultimate cocktail of rebellion.